The United Kingdom has softened parts of its latest sanctions targeting Russian oil products after fuel prices surged across Europe during ongoing tensions in the Middle East and disruptions in global shipping routes. British officials said the temporary changes were necessary to protect consumers and businesses from soaring energy costs and possible shortages of diesel and aviation fuel. The move comes as international oil markets remain unstable due to concerns surrounding the Strait of Hormuz, one of the world's most important energy shipping lanes. Under the revised policy, the UK will temporarily allow imports of diesel and jet fuel refined in third countries using Russian crude oil. Countries such as India and Turkey have become major refining centers for Russian oil since Western sanctions were introduced following Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022. Britain had previously planned to fully block these imports, but the government now says restrictions will be introduced more gradually because of extraordinary market conditions. Prime Minister Keir Starmer defended the decision, describing it as a short-term emergency measure designed to prevent further economic pressure on British families already struggling with high living costs. He insisted the UK remains committed to supporting Ukraine and maintaining pressure on Moscow, but argued that immediate energy security must also be considered during a global crisis. Government ministers said the temporary exemptions would be reviewed regularly and could be removed if oil markets stabilize in the coming months. The decision triggered political backlash across Britain, with opposition figures accusing the government of weakening sanctions against Russia at a critical moment in the Ukraine conflict. Critics argued that allowing refined products linked to Russian crude indirectly benefits the Kremlin and undermines the united Western strategy aimed at reducing Moscow's energy revenues. Some lawmakers also criticized the government for limiting new North Sea drilling projects while easing restrictions on imported fuel connected to Russia. Energy analysts say the UK government faced increasing pressure as diesel and petrol prices climbed sharply following renewed instability in the Gulf region. Concerns over possible disruptions to oil shipments through the Strait of Hormuz pushed global crude prices higher, increasing fears of inflation and supply shortages across Europe. Airlines warned about rising jet fuel costs while transport companies raised concerns that expensive diesel could lead to higher prices for food, goods, and public services. Economists noted that energy markets remain extremely sensitive to geopolitical tensions, especially after years of instability caused by the Ukraine war and supply chain disruptions. Financial markets reacted cautiously to the British decision, with some investors welcoming efforts to stabilize fuel supplies while others worried about the long-term political consequences. Oil traders said the temporary easing could help reduce immediate shortages in European fuel markets, particularly during the busy summer travel season when demand for jet fuel typically rises. At the same time, some European Union officials expressed concern that adjustments to sanctions policies could weaken international coordination against Russia if other countries follow similar paths. The United States has also introduced temporary exemptions linked to Russian oil cargoes already moving through global markets, reflecting growing concern among Western governments about rising energy prices. Analysts believe leaders in Europe and North America are increasingly trying to balance political pressure on Moscow with the economic realities facing their own populations. Rising fuel prices have already become a major issue for households dealing with expensive food, housing, and transportation costs. British consumers have reported another increase in petrol station prices in recent weeks, while businesses dependent on transport have warned about reduced profits and higher operating costs. Inflation remains one of the biggest challenges facing the British economy, and economists say continued increases in oil prices could slow economic growth later this year. The government has already extended some fuel duty relief measures and may consider additional support packages if the situation worsens. Meanwhile, Ukraine reacted carefully to the British announcement. Ukrainian officials said they understood the pressure created by global energy markets but stressed the importance of maintaining strong sanctions against Russia. President Volodymyr Zelensky reportedly discussed the issue directly with Prime Minister Starmer during recent diplomatic talks, emphasizing the need for continued Western unity. British officials insisted military aid and financial support for Ukraine would continue without interruption despite the temporary changes to oil-related sanctions. The wider global energy situation remains uncertain as tensions in the Middle East continue affecting shipping routes and investor confidence. Oil prices have fluctuated dramatically over recent weeks, with traders closely monitoring military developments and diplomatic negotiations involving major regional powers. Experts warn that any further disruption to Gulf shipping lanes could trigger another major spike in fuel costs worldwide. Some analysts believe governments may be forced to make additional temporary policy adjustments if energy supplies become more limited during the coming months. Environmental groups also criticized the UK government's decision, arguing that the crisis highlights the dangers of continued dependence on fossil fuels and imported energy supplies. Climate activists called for faster investment in renewable energy, public transport, and domestic clean power projects to reduce vulnerability to international oil market shocks. However, industry leaders argued that rapid changes to energy systems cannot happen immediately and that stable fuel supplies remain essential for economic security. The debate reflects the broader challenge facing governments attempting to balance climate goals, economic stability, and geopolitical pressures at the same time. Business groups welcomed the temporary flexibility, saying it could help prevent severe disruption to transport and manufacturing sectors already struggling with high costs. Airlines, shipping companies, and logistics firms warned that sudden fuel shortages or further price spikes could damage economic recovery efforts and increase unemployment risks. Retail organizations also expressed concern that higher transport costs would eventually lead to more expensive products for consumers across the country. Economists said the government's decision demonstrates how energy policy has become increasingly linked to global political crises and economic security concerns. Britain's revised sanctions approach may also influence discussions within the European Union and other Western allies about how to manage energy restrictions during periods of market instability. Some countries continue pushing for tougher sanctions against Russian energy exports, while others worry about the impact on domestic industries and consumer prices. Analysts say future policy decisions will likely depend on both developments in Ukraine and the stability of global oil supplies. For now, British officials insist the changes are temporary and targeted only at preventing economic disruption during an exceptional period of uncertainty. The government says it remains committed to reducing reliance on Russian energy over the long term while protecting households and businesses from sudden financial shocks. As global markets continue reacting to geopolitical tensions, energy prices are expected to remain a major political and economic issue across Europe throughout the rest of the year.